What if I told you that Ferrari just discovered something inside the SF26 that could completely change the 2026 season? Because after the Miami Grand Prix, Maranello engineers revealed some absolutely shocking internal data that explains why Lewis Hamilton came out more optimistic than ever, even after weeks full of doubts, criticism, and frustration. And be careful, because we are not talking about simple aerodynamic improvements or a minor update. We are talking about figures that, according to internal team sources, would demonstrate that the true potential of the SF26 has not even appeared on the track yet. Hamilton knows it, and that is why right now a feeling is beginning to grow within Ferrari that has not been seen for a long time, the feeling that they can really fight again against Red Bull and Mercedes. But there's a huge problem, because while the car's data is promising, there's a critical weakness that's still holding back the entire project. And when you find out what it is, you will understand perfectly why Hamilton sent such a direct message after Miami. Lewis Hamilton arrived at Miami 2026 carrying enormous pressure on his shoulders. The first races with Ferrari had left contradictory signals. At times the SF26 showed flashes of real competitiveness, especially in slow corners and technical sectors. But as soon as long straights or conditions of maximum energy demand appeared, the Italian car began to lose ground against Red Bull and Mercedes. And that began to generate enormous concern within Maranello, because Ferrari felt it had a fast car, but the results still did not reflect that potential. Hamilton knew it perfectly. And the most interesting thing is that after Miami he stopped talking like a frustrated pilot and started talking like someone who had finally understood where the real problem with SF26 was. In addition, Miami left another very important conclusion for Ferrari. The 11 modifications introduced to the car were not a total failure as some initially thought. Yes, the visible jump in performance was not as big as expected from the outside, but internally the data showed very important hidden improvements in aerodynamic stability, airflow management, and rear diffuser efficiency. Especially the evolution of the famous Macarena rear wing began to deliver very promising numbers in race simulations. The problem was that many of those gains were masked by the disadvantage in straight-line power. And that is precisely why Hamilton left Miami with a strange mix of frustration and hope. Frustration because they know they still can't consistently fight for victories. But hope because for the first time Ferrari has technical evidence that the SF26 does have a basis capable of becoming a championship car if they manage to solve its main weakness. According to post-Grand Prix analysis, Ferrari found extremely important gains in aerodynamic flow stability at medium speed, especially in linked corners, one of the points where the car had suffered greatly at the beginning of the year. The new aerodynamic package introduced in Miami made it possible to stabilize the behavior of the rear axle during phases of progressive acceleration, something vital under the current regulations. This considerably reduced temperature losses in the rear tires and improved the car's consistency over long runs. It may seem like a small detail, but in Formula One these changes completely alter the competitiveness of a car. Because it's not just about a fast lap. It's about maintaining constant performance throughout an entire stint. And Ferrari began to achieve it for the first time in 2026. Hamilton was one of the first to notice these differences from inside the cockpit. In fact, one of the things that surprised the engineers most was the level of positive feedback Lewis provided after the long simulations. The Briton explained that the SF26 now allowed him to attack corner entries more aggressively without suffering sudden losses of rear stability. This was essential, because during the first races of the year the car behaved extremely delicately when the tires began to degrade. Basically the balance disappeared. But in Miami that trend began to reduce drastically. And that's where Ferrari discovered something even more shocking. The more the aerodynamic platform was optimized, the more evident it became that the car's main limitation was solely the power unit. That perfectly explains why Hamilton was so forceful when speaking publicly about the engine. I wasn't criticizing the team out of frustration. He was sending a very clear message. Ferrari has already identified the real bottleneck of the SF26. And when a team finds exactly where it is losing performance, the picture changes completely. Because until that moment Ferrari was still trying to understand if its problems came from the aerodynamic concept, the suspension, the wind tunnel correlation, or even the mechanical setup. Miami eliminated many of those doubts. The data showed that the car does have efficient downforce, that the car does generate confidence in curves, that the car can manage tires much better than the SF25. But they also revealed something worrying. On the straight, Ferrari was losing too much time to Mercedes and Red Bull, especially in energy deployment and hybrid recovery efficiency. And this began to generate a lot of optimism around Hamilton for a very specific reason. Lewis knows exactly what a championship car looks like from the inside. He lived it for years in Mercedes. Get to know the sensations that a car transmits when the technical base really works. And according to several leaks after Miami, the Briton began to transmit internally that Ferrari is much closer than people imagine. In fact, some engineers were surprised by the calm and confidence that Hamilton showed after a race where apparently Ferrari was still far from dominating. Because Lewis wasn't just looking at the end result. I was looking at the hidden data, aerodynamic micro gains, the stability of the car in traffic, reduced degradation, behavior in fast corners. All those little details that usually anticipate whether or not a project can become a championship contender months later. Even within Ferrari, the feeling began to grow that the SF26 could have a much higher development ceiling than its rivals. And this is key, because in modern Formula One, the fastest car at the beginning of the year does not necessarily win. The project that evolves best during the season wins. McLaren has demonstrated this before with aggressive evolutionary packages that completely transformed its performance. And Ferrari believes it can do something similar in 2026. Especially since the new Miami parts were designed as an initial platform to unlock even more radical future evolutions. Basically, Miami wasn't the ultimate package, it was just the beginning. And Hamilton seems to have understood that before anyone else. However, as optimism began to grow within the team, a huge concern also emerged that could define Ferrari's entire season. Because engineers discovered that there is an extremely small window where SF26 delivers its maximum potential. And that means that any small setup error can cause the car to lose performance massively from track to track. That's where the real challenge begins for Hamilton and Ferrari. Because having a fast car is of no use if you can't make it perform consistently every weekend. And precisely that will be the next big battle within Maranello. And this is where Ferrari enters an extremely dangerous area. Because the SF26 could be, at the same time, one of the cars with the greatest potential on the entire grid, and also one of the most difficult to exploit correctly. After Miami, engineers began to detect that the car operates within a very narrow aerodynamic window. When everything is in sync, tire temperature, ground clearance, energy load and mechanical balance, the car can get very close to the pace of the leaders. But if even one of these factors moves even slightly outside the ideal range, performance drops dramatically. And that perfectly explains why Ferrari has shown such different versions of itself depending on the circuit or even the weekend session. Hamilton immediately understood the risk that represented. Because he already experienced something similar in Mercedes during the last years of the ground effect. Extremely sensitive cars, fast at times, but impossible to constantly keep in the optimal zone. And precisely because of that experience, Lewis began to play a much more important role in the development of the SF26 after Miami. Technical meetings intensified. The British began to work much more directly with simulation and aerodynamic correlation engineers. Ferrari needed to understand why the car had such high performance peaks, but also such sharp drops when conditions changed slightly. And the most worrying thing is that the data revealed something very clear. The more aggressive the setup was seeking maximum performance, the more unpredictable the car became. This began to divide the team's priorities internally. A portion of the engineers wanted to continue betting on extreme configurations to unlock the absolute potential of the SF26. But another group defended a much more conservative philosophy, prioritizing stability and consistency. And Hamilton positioned himself right in the middle of that discussion. Because Lewis knows that to win championships it is not enough to have an occasionally explosive car. You need a car that responds the same every weekend in any temperature and under any conditions. That's where Ferrari is still far from perfection. Because although Miami showed enormous technical progress, it also exposed that the car's operating margin remains dangerously small. Furthermore, subsequent simulations left another rather alarming conclusion for Ferrari. On circuits where long straights and aggressive hybrid deployment phases predominate, the engine disadvantage could be amplified even more. And that directly threatens Hamilton's aspirations for the second half of the season. Because while Ferrari continues to refine its aerodynamic platform, Red Bull and Mercedes continue to have a huge advantage in energy efficiency and top speed. In fact, several internal analyses showed that Ferrari was compensating for part of that difference by taking more risks in braking and cornering. Basically, Hamilton was squeezing time out of the car in areas where other drivers couldn't even attempt it consistently. And that has a limit. Because an entire championship cannot be sustained solely on extreme driving. However, despite all these risks, the atmosphere within Maranello changed radically after Miami. For the first time in a long time, Ferrari stopped talking just about understanding the car and started talking about how to maximize it. That mental difference is gigantic. It means that the team no longer doubts the technical basis of the SF26. Now the objective is to unlock everything that the car still keeps hidden. And according to several leaks from Italy, the next evolutionary packages could be much more aggressive than initially expected. Ferrari believes there is still a huge amount of downforce available in the current concept without excessively penalizing drag. And that's exactly what keeps Hamilton so optimistic. Because Lewis feels that SF26 has not yet shown its true colors. Right now, Lewis Hamilton seems convinced of one thing: Ferrari is much closer to fighting for consistent victories than most imagine. But he also knows that the margin for error is practically non-existent. A wrong update, a bad correlation, or a delay in the evolution of the engine could completely destroy this entire wave of optimism born after Miami. And that is why the next races will be decisive. Because there we will discover if the SF26 really is the beginning of Ferrari's definitive resurrection, or simply another promising car that never managed to convert its potential into titles. And perhaps that is the most shocking thing of all. That after so many years of doubts, mistakes, and failed projects, Ferrari once again transmits a feeling that has not appeared for a long time. The feeling that they could really build a car capable of returning them to the top of Formula One. Now the big question is whether they will have the time, the precision, and the technical capacity to complete that transformation before the championship definitively slips out of their hands. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.